Um, I think today is going to be a little bit of an extension of yesterday in terms of thematic focus. Yesterday we almost like sampled a lot of elements to build. It is like what is an image of wildness that we can seek inspiration from? What does wildness mean in like computing as hardware? How does it translate into practice? Today I want it to be more of a conversation, a kind of a communal setting that you're less active participants and more, passive observers and more active participants. And maybe to open up the space a little bit, I want to ask the people that were here, what is one thing that you took home from the day, from the conversation yesterday? And there's going to be a mic going around, so just raise your hand and wait for the mic. It could be a word, it could be a feeling. Don't think too much. All right. Opening the floor. So what stood out to you?
Me, I remember when Josepha said that when we have the question about his pieces,
Yeah.
pieces of art, about the sculpture, and someone says not so fluid
Yeah.
because it's sculpture material.
Yeah, yeah.
And so she speak about poetry and how it's fluid. And me, I think I left with this plus a lot of things that said scientific also. Sorry.
All right. Any more reflections? I see people on the cusp of sharing, so
Yes.
see it happen. Any more going once? All right.
One thing I took from one of the talks is this feeling of that there's more, or this observable feeling that we cannot grasp, or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think from the second block there was this kind of feeling that Darim was trying to replicate. And I think we went through a beautiful journey of like saying, okay, how do we replicate this through the work, through a mix of methodologies? That also, I think, yeah, to me was quite, revealing, inspiring. All right, so I recognize I called out half the room almost for like answering the first question, but I want to ask for the question for the people who just came in today. What do you want to get out of the session today? What are you hoping to unveil, uncover about wildness? And maybe you have a technical question that you're like, I do visual artwork and I want to see how I can introduce wildness into my work. Anybody? I see people still on the verge, so I'm going to let it marinate for a second. What are you hoping to listen to today?
Maybe meeting accomplices.
Okay, we need to pass the mic.
That's Mike.
So 2 words, meeting accomplices.
Can you elaborate?
Well, finding people that are trying to do similar things, maybe from different perspectives.
And thank you for shifting the audience again, the perspective again to the audience, because I think you're very much as part of the conversation as the people on stage. All right, so now that we're a little bit warmed up, I want to maybe go over what happened yesterday, because I think it took me a lot of time to go home and process the richness of the conversation, and I wanted to be a bit more intentional about kind of really distilling almost or marinating with the conversation a little bit. And yesterday particularly, we took the theme of wildness, becoming wild, bewilderment. And we first asked the question, what is wildness? How can it translate into something like computing? We talked about fluid transistors as this kind of earthly life force that can inform computing infrastructure. We talked about organic art science performances that blur kind of the line between the performer, the instrument, and the arts. We talked about wilding in practice and audiovisual arts. We had two beautiful performers, Cortical and Tarim, who kind of looked at genre-breaking music and wild club nights, and how emergence can be part of that practice, how human-machine collaboration can be part of that practice. We also looked at refocusing on the actual wilderness, like the OG wilderness, through the lens of the deep sea, of really looking at our perception of the wild, the weird, and what we can learn from it, and how we can balance or dance with heritage, critical introspection, and world building. And these are all themes we're going to go deeper into today. But one, I think, wild, glaring conclusion from the conversation we had yesterday is that we really need to revolve around an intentional practice of a slow intentional practice of crafting human, non-human networks of care where weird and wild are facets of a love for the foreign, or what was called by the keynote yesterday, Dr. Stacy, xenophilia. And with that note, I think we can open the second day, because today we're going to go a little bit deeper into a lot of the sub-themes that we kind of glared over yesterday. And the first one, to me, is really world building. Is that we're talking about this concept, we're seeking inspiration from it, we're animating it in multiple ways, but how can we then reconcile some of the tensions to build worlds? And one of these tensions is the concept of becoming animal from Deleuze. And it's really almost an escapist notion of okay, we're going to break out of the molds of identity that we have now and kind of infuse into what is around us. And Haraway's notion of becoming of crafting a more relational growth. We're growing with the atmosphere, with the natural elements around us. And this also invokes a different kind of story about the history of progress, about the world and how we tell it. That it's not just constant humans or the Anthropocene kind of submitting the elements to what they want to do, but more it's an alternative history of decay and almost descent of the world around us. So we want to ask, how can world building be a vessel for political and cultural resistance? How can we build for ecosystems? And the first two speakers that are going to engage in this topic ask the question of, are we becoming animal versus becoming wild? So first we have Troy Vettese, who's an environmental historian and Cersei Wanthrop Research Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley. He has held fellowships at the New York University, Harvard University, University of Copenhagen, and European University Institute. He's currently working with Drew Pendergrass on a sequel to Half-Earth Socialism, which has been translated into 5 languages and inspired an educational video game. Vettese's writing has appeared in both popular and scholarly publications, including New Left Review, Critical Historical Studies, The Guardian, N+1, The New Republic, and The Jacobian, to name a few. So I would like to welcome on stage Troy to walk us through some of his work. Big round of applause.
Thanks for that kind introduction. I'm going to give a talk where I'm basically working through some problems for my next book. And I wrote a book on the environmental crisis and socialism and all this. And I'm a Marxist, and Marxists were extremely hostile to this idea of rewilding and veganism. And this made me think, like, what is like a socialist animal ethics, right? How can socialism help us relate to nature differently? And I won't get so much into the Marxist theory today, but I'm going to give a talk that's going to be in two parts. The first is going to be a history of civilization over the last 10,000 years, and I have 20 minutes, so I'm going to try to do, what is that, 500 years a minute. So and I have a lot of slides, so it's going to be quick and telegraphic, but maybe we can talk about some of these things more in the Q&A. And it's imagining what does civilization look like if we see it instead of a history of progress, which is what Marxists tend to do, and see it instead as a history of contingency, accident, disaster. And what then opens up in the second part is how can we perhaps repair or address this civilizational rift that we have created with nature. So I'm sure people are aware that civilization, and by that I mean sedentary, agricultural, hierarchical societies, had developed independently in several parts of the world over the last 6,000 or 7,000 years. And this is a strange problem for archaeologists and sociologists and all that, because humans are the same animal as we were 250,000 years ago. But then suddenly we have this emergence of civilization, and we have to remember that humans as hunter-gatherers are a remarkably egalitarian species. I mean, there was a resistance to hierarchy. So the problem is hierarchy is imposed basically by force. There's some different thinkers working on this. One of many is Michael Mann. Does anyone know Michael Mann, maybe this Michael Mann or another Michael Mann? Who are the other Michael Manns?
I know the director.
There's a director, and there's another one.
This one?
Well, there's sociologists, and then there's also the climate scientist. If you ever see the hockey stick graph, that's the other Michael Mann. So if you ever have a child, just name your child Michael Mann, and they will be successful. That's my advice for today. So, anyway, so Michael Mann works on this idea of circumscription, as in humans become civilized because they are put in a social cage, as in they are unable to escape hierarchy, and therefore you have some durability and hierarchy emerge with different class-based societies. And Egypt is a special case. It is one of the oldest and most durable civilizations, and it's the best case of this circumscription theory. That's because you have a very fertile river valley and delta surrounded by desert. So if you are farming there, it's very hard to escape, right? You have to go across a lot of desert to get somewhere else. And this is one reason for, one understanding of why civilization emerges. He doesn't get into the ecological reasons for why this cage emerged. So what's interesting to me is that the Sahara, of course, was much wetter 10,000 years ago. It had lots of lakes and grasslands and trees and gazelle and giraffes and all this. And this is during the African humid period that we see in the bottom map here. And the African humid period is really determined by the Milankovitch cycle. There are three parts of the Milankovitch cycle. The one that we care about is the first one with the precession of the Earth. And precession is a kind of hard thing to explain if you're not a physicist, but basically, I say if you have a spinning top, obviously your top is spinning one direction, but it might also wobble, right? And that wobble is the precession. So the Earth is wobbling as it's going around the sun. And that meant that more sunlight was hitting the equator 10,000 years ago, which you think would dry out the area, but actually made the monsoon by West Africa more powerful, which brought more rain to the Sahara. So it was wetter. And the problem was, like, when the precession began to change and it started to dry out, people living in North Africa responded to that by the change in their ecosystem by domesticating animals. So they had cows, sheep, goats, and all this, and they began to domesticate them. And then these animals began to eat certain vegetation at the expense of others, as in like leafy versus like woody vegetation, which then changed the humidity of these ecosystems, further drying them out, which then meant there was more dependence on livestock, which then led to this vicious cycle of destroying the Sahara. So we have to really imagine, that the domestication of humans in civilized societies was linked to the domestication of animals. It's kind of double domestication. And once domestication happens, certain changes happen in the body to domesticated animals. They become smaller. They have cramped jaws. They also have smaller brains. And we see the same thing happen to humans, actually. So before we were taller, everyone had like Brad Pitt, like lantern jaws. We actually also had larger brains. And that's because the environment was simply more stimulating compared to, say, a field or a cow shed. And therefore, your brain actually grew more. We shouldn't have any kind of, maybe not contempt, but we shouldn't underestimate what lives were like for hunter-gatherers before the emergence of civilization. People actually lived fairly long lives into their 60s or even 70s, which was only surpassed at a global level in the last few years. So what I'm trying to say with all this is that you have an accidental transition into civilization. These civilizations that are based on, again, this double domestication of humans and animals begin to spread and emerge into each other and reducing the amount of space for people to escape this social cage. At the same time, these civilizations are very fragile structures that are beset by constant outbreaks of disease, and that's because diseases emerge historically from relationships between humans and livestock and wild animals, and simply by this greater proximity between us, especially livestock. All these diseases that we're familiar with today, like measles and the common cold and influenza and all that, emerged only in the last several thousand years. And they are destabilizing these new states. The really bad one is the Black Death in the 14th century. It kills around half the population of Europe. And this then leads to another case of accidental history, right? Where the way different societies in Europe reacted to the plague, it varied quite a bit between France and Eastern Europe and England. But in England, lords reacted by leasing land and creating markets and labor and agricultural goods, which begins this transition to capitalism. And this is a whole debate amongst Marxist historians, which we can talk about more, but basically we accidentally started civilization, like unintentionally, which leads to a worsening of life for most people and animals, and then we have the emergence of capitalism again through another accident. Capitalism then supercharges this process. We have Robert Bakewell, who's the first scientific breeder in the 18th century. He's trying to get livestock to mature much faster with a lot more fat. He even reduces the amount of bones that a sheep would have and increases the amount of meat and fat on them. And again, changing their bodies to make them better, more perfect commodities. This drastically increases the livestock population more. We see this tendency continuing into the present day. And obviously, people are eating a lot more meat than they used to. What's interesting is that chickens, like the poultry industry, is really the cutting edge of the factory farm system, which emerges after World War II, where chicken meat was once a luxury, becomes an everyday good. And we can't really understand the history of neoliberalism without understanding the history of factory farming. One of the most important organizers and funders of the neoliberal movement is Anthony Fisher, who was one of the first and largest factory farm industrialists in the UK in the 1960s. And he then set up the Atlas Network, which is the network of neoliberal think tanks around the world, and this is from their website, you know. So neoliberalism is not a conspiracy or a secret. I mean, they're very proud of their organizational capacity, and so we can't think about these things separately. And also, he really supercharged the deregulation of agriculture, which is basically one of the first fights neoliberalism led against the regulatory state when it first emerged. But neoliberalism is a sideshow in some ways to what's really coming, right? And what I'm trying to say is we have civilization emerge, we have capitalism emerge, these things mix, we have a capitalist agriculture emerge, and now we are living in an era of many new zoonotic diseases emerging. That is, new diseases that cross the species barrier. Avian flu, the H5N1 virus in particular, has had an epidemic amongst bird populations since 2020, and this was a very worrying episode. It was before we were able to stamp it out after killing, you know, hundreds of millions of birds. But this time, no matter how many birds we kill, we can't stop it. And the disease has also spread between mammals. We have a big seal die-off a couple of years ago, and they speculate we're one mutation away from human-to-human transmission. It may have happened already in some isolated cases. My brother is actually living next to a nurse in Vancouver, and that nurse was responsible for the first possible human-to-human case where this girl nearly died of avian flu. We have to remember that COVID was a sideshow, was nothing. The mortality rate is 1%. Avian flu or another new zoonotic disease would have a mortality rate closer to 50%. So what happens when this 10,000-year cycle that we've seen emerge in the Sahara to the Middle Ages and so forth, when does this thing start to break down, right, when we have constant disease outbreaks? So how can we live differently with nature? So I won't spend too much time on Haraway. I will just say her idea of becoming with is the dominant frame in animal studies, and she is interested in how we can think about multi-species relationships, and she generally focuses on either domesticated livestock or on pets, and she's interested in this everyday kind of quotidian relationship that people have. To me, I would say this represents as a figure of the good mastery, right? How can we turn every animal into a pet and treat it like a pet in some ways? Interestingly, she's not interested in animal liberation. She's very much against veganism, for instance, and she's against Deleuze and Guattari's idea of becoming animal. She sees this as an inherently conservative reaching for the sublime, rather than what she's proposing. So just to be brief, what are they talking about when they say becoming animal? Deleuze and Guattari are trying to imagine what is a way to have a philosophy that escapes the family and the state, right? They're trying to get away from that. And they start to look to animals to begin to philosophize about its alternative arrangements or existence that we can have. And they speak of the relationship between an individual and a wild animal. And they call this a relationship between the sorcerer and the demon and all this. And they give examples of like Ahab from like Moby Dick. And what they're interested in how do people then have this intense interest, create a bond between themselves and another species that is intense, that has possibilities of the sublime, and allows us to escape our own speciesness, a species being, if you will. I think, Deleuze and Guattari are a good starting point. We can build upon them. Irving Goh has a really nice essay where he compares becoming animal to Taoist concepts. And Chuang Tzu is well known for his his parable of the butterfly, as in, is he a butterfly dreaming as a philosopher, or the reverse? And this interest in having perspectives of other species taken into account, to actually look to animals as a way of philosophizing, what Go calls an animal philosophy, is something that I think we should think about. And Chung Tzu also constantly says we cannot explain Tao, right? We cannot really articulate what Tao is. It has to be some kind of experience, right? We have to look to the animals. The animals have to teach us. And to me, I think one of the best representations of this relationship is The Peregrine. Has anyone read this book? Okay. Werner Herzog often gets his, when he does like a master class in like film, he gets them to read The Peregrine. The Peregrine is a book about nothing. It's a book about a man who's a bird watcher, and if you've ever gone bird watching with someone, nothing happens, right? It's the most useless activity. But I mean that in a good way, right? How can we start to value uselessness and useless experiences? But what birding does is it creates this possibility of what Taoists would call wu wei, right? This action of inaction, this ability to feel the world through a flow experience, where your concentration is diffused outwards, and you begin to forget about yourself because you're so focused but also relaxed at the same time, trying to experience the world. And that's what birding teaches you, right? You're looking to the animal, and at the same time, like, these animals are teaching you this experience. And with becoming animal, like, you never actually become another animal. You always have this gap between yourself and this wild animal. And that gap is predicated on our lack of control and our lack of understanding and knowledge for this other creature. But you're always trying to bridge this gap, right? You're trying to dehumanize yourself. And that's what Baker is really expressing in this book. In the same way, like at an individual level, that is what he's trying to do. And I think at a species level, we have to try to bridge this gap between us and other species that has opened up because of this civilizational rift that I'm talking about. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm a Marxist. And I think Marx is very good at understanding how capitalism is a society that is constantly decreasing our experience of the world. In the 1844 manuscripts, what he talks about is like how capitalism reduces workers to their bare life, their animal, a level of animalization, right? Like, as in, they live in poor conditions, they breathe bad air, they don't see natural light, they're doing repetitive, boring work and all that, and we're losing our experience of the world. But what Marxists don't have is the inverse of that. Like, how will socialism increase our experience of the world, right? This is something that's missing from socialism. And I think you have to go beyond socialism to begin to imagine this. And I think, for me, by looking to Taoism or looking to Deleuze and Guattari, we can begin to imagine socialism being a society that has to plan for the unexpected, right? Has to create the possibility of experiences of the sublime, to have us get outside of ourselves. So we have to give up control and allow there to be more of a wild world that can surprise us and to remind us that we are just a bunch of small animals on a very ancient, massive, powerful planet with myriad other creatures. So I'll wrap up because I have a blinking, scary timer down here. But I will say just briefly, one thing that I think is separating Marxists who work on the environment from, I think, what I'm trying to articulate is, again, not just seeing the natural world as something we have to manage, right? Or something that we have to become with and treat like a pet, right? But something that can expose us to intense, strange experiences. And this matters more than all the scientific studies that I've read and all the history that I've read, is this actual experience of actually learning from animals. And for myself, I remember being a novice bird watcher during the pandemic, and I went to this park that is an old dump near Toronto that has been rewilded by plants where the seeds are just floating over and it's rewilded itself. And there's the largest cormorant colony in North America. Tens of thousands of birds there. And I remember looking across the bay in this park and through my binoculars, and what I thought was black sand was actually just countless birds. And that feeling of the sublime is what motivates my interest in this topic. And I think we need to imagine how can we articulate and care about these non-rational, useless, but very meaningful experiences of the wild. Thank you very much.
I think we have one question, perhaps. Well, first of all, thank you so much for walking us through this, because I feel like you've identified this gap and you've positioned it super well in kind of not an alternative history of the world, but a history through a different lens. But I want to talk a little bit about the role of how do we tend to that gap in the role of fiction and speculation. So I know through the game and the book of Half-Earth Socialism that you've explored this a little bit. So how can we be more intentional about bridging that gap, and what role does fiction play?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an artist, but I think about what Baker's trying to do is that he's trying to get you into his world. He's like, I have felt this beautiful relationship with a wild animal, right? And he wants to share that, and he's trying to articulate what is that becoming animal, right? And I think it's a difficult book where, again, like Dowse said, you can't really express it, right? But he's like getting as close as he can to expressing it. And I'm not sure what it's like to read that book if you don't know anything about birds. Because he's just talking about, then this thrush went through the bush, and like maybe if you don't know all these different species, it's meaningless. But so I think like you always are constantly struggling. How do I articulate and share an extremely personal experience? But my guess is art is much better at that than. Like I'm not an artist. I'm just trying to give like a talk. I'm trying to convince a bunch of Marxists who are just like, we are super rational and scientific, and we don't like
to invoke a different framework. So like this could be thought of differently somehow.
It's really hard, and they don't like me. But
I want to talk a lot more also about kind of the way that you've looked back at the history. But I think the blinking timer is going to come and haunt me in a second. But maybe we have a quick question from the audience. Very quick. We have time to talk also after the second part of this block. All right. So I think we're good on time.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think to that conversation on world building and what art can help us, I think it's a really good moment to introduce Josèfa, who's coming back again. And I think yesterday gave a keynote on this exact topic of how do we kind of interplay? And to me, it felt like a dance between kind of mythology, world building, deep sea exploration, and how we can position ourselves a little bit better within this kind of ecosystem. So a big round of applause. Thanks a lot, Troy.
Thank you.
And I'll see you in a second.
Yeah.
And just very quickly, let me reintroduce Josèfa, who was our keynote speaker yesterday. She's a French artist, performer, writer whose practice combines sculpture, photomontage, film, and sound, gathering the raw material for her work from the internet, material science books, and photographic archives. Josèfa employs the method of assemblage of images, sounds, and stories to deconstruct hegemonic discourses on notions of origins, identity, and race. She weaves naturally multiple narratives together, and I think it's nice to mention that she's also performed, and her work has been shown at venues such as the Triangle Astrides in Marseille, 60th Venice Biennale collateral event, and the LAS Foundation, amongst others. Big round of applause for Josèfa.
Sorry, it's not my slide. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Futuristic Ancestry, World-Building Speculative Narratives. So, why build worlds? When dominant history excludes us, we must build our own worlds as a refuge, as resistance, as rhythm. I'd like to begin with this idea that world building is not just about fiction or imagination. For many of us, artists from the diaspora, descendant of fractured genealogies, it's a vital gesture, a strategy for survival. World building means weaving stories when archives are missing. On screen, behind me, one detail of entanglement, a photomontage I realized in 2023. In my practice, I use photomontage, assemblage, as a research of methodology, a way to weave together multiple layers of archive, political archive, familial, and historical. These intersect with the deep sea imagery, botanical fragments, and microscopic life forms, creating ecosystem of memory where forgotten stories and acts of resistance become entangled and reactivated. It means composing other cosmologies when we've been reduced to silence. It's a way of reprogramming space, time, and memory, especially when history has erased us or displaced us. Black science fiction counter words as a survival tools. So Afrofuturism is the program to program the past and the future, to recode memory and to remix chronology, as Coderation says.
I'm not real, I'm just like you. You don't exist in this society. If you did, your people wouldn't be seeking equal rights. You're not real. If you were, you'd have some status among the nations of the world. So we're both myths. I do not come to you as a reality. I come to you as the myth, because that's what black people are, myths. I came from a dream that the black man dreamed long ago. I'm actually a present sent to you by your ancestors. I'm gonna be here till I pick out certain one of you to take back with me.
What if we won't come? You gonna make us come?
Then I'm gonna have to do you like they did you in Africa. Chain you up, take you with me.
Are there any whiteys up there?
They're walking there today.
That's right. She told me right there.
They take frequent trips to the moon. I notice none of you have been invited. How do you think you're going to exist? The year 2000 is right around the corner.
What's that crystal thing in your hand?
We're living in the space age. We're living in the space age. We're living in a space age.
In this excerpt of Space is the Place, 1974, Sun Ra doesn't simply perform music. He encounters a young group of people coming from the youth Black Panther Party, and he performed music as a rupture. In this film, Sun Ra appears as a radiant Egyptian outfit, landing from outer space to deliver a message. It's time to leave the planet. This is not escapism. This is a deeply political gesture when Earth becomes uninhabitable for Black people, socially, historically, imaginatively, because of segregation in the case of Sun Ra. Then the only option is to build another world elsewhere. So the spaceship in Space is the Place is more than a science fiction cliché. It's a symbolic mothership, a black pyramid in motion, a reverse middle passage. Where the transatlantic slave ships tore people from land and cosmos, this pyramidal spacecraft proposes a return, a healing, a reclamation, through space, through myth, through technology. In that sense, many artists reimagine the pyramid as not as a monument to the past, but as a vehicle for the future, a sacred vessel, a technological archive, a coded message for survival. Futuristic ancestry between reclamation and avatarization. When dominant history excludes us, we must build our own words as a refuge, as resistance, as a rhythm. The mythology of spaceship as a pyramid or pyramid as a ship is part of a temporal entanglement that defines Black speculative thought. It's not about a linear past, present, and future. It's about a spiral when ancestral memory, contemporary resistance, and speculative future coexist, overlap, and mutate. In Afrofuturism, time becomes layered. The past is never gone. It's embedded in bodies, sounds, mineral, and rituals. The future is not distant. It's already here, flickering in the cracks of today's. The present is haunted, coded, unstable, full of echoes and glitches. This is why I speak of world building and Afrofuturism as an act of temporal recomposition. It's not just about building an aesthetic, it's about intervening in time itself, opening back doors in colonial timelines, rerouting memory through myth, science, and speculation. When we speak of futuristic ancestry, we speak of beings who move across dimension, avatars who remember forward and dream backward. This gesture of turning to science fiction and alternate temporalities is key for many Black artists and diasporic artists. It is a way to hack the archive, to bend time, to refuse erasure. This is what I see in the work of artists who invoke ancient Egypt, not as a nostalgia, but a reclaiming, as rewriting the stolen past, because Egypt, or Kemet, was historically erased from Black culture and extracted from Africa. To reactivate this imaginary is to reconnect with the cosmic Black ancestry. Scholars like Cher Anta Diop and Webb Du Bois fought to re-anchor Egypt in the African continuum, not only as a historical truth, but as a political and symbolic necessity. Today, many contemporary artists, myself included, reinvest this visual legacy. The golden faces, divine postures, hieroglyphic aesthetic, the symbolism of temples, mineral, and solar crowns, the avatar as a technological and mythological being. In Mélas de Saturn, the project Face becomes a hybrid deity, a cybernetic priestess, a post-human griot, and a digital reliquary. It's a Black avatar from video games, ritual, code, and cosmic memories. Composing other cosmologies to dismantle narratives of oppression, it's a world where identities are frozen by dominant narrative. Reclaim science fiction, new narrative as a real political act of thinking and survival. Composing other cosmologies means weaving unstable networks of stories, images, and sound, symbiotic assemblage where being frees itself from fixed assignment. It is about generating chimera beings, shifting myth, fictional ecologies, life form in perpetual symbiosis, weaving multiple connections, like living knowledge and shared becomings. Through symbiosis and fiction, we dismantle the matrices of oppression and invent other inhabitable worlds of connect with ancestors. A disjoint history, the need for alternate narrative with Mélas de Saturn. A history without origin or end, animated by the pursuit of the non-original and the multiplication of selves, in the labyrinth of Avatar, who is the I that speak. So let me continue with Mélas de Saturn, a film I co-directed in 2020 with Sean Hart. This work embodies a world of fragmentation, where identity is no longer singular, but composite, dislocated, and layered. The protagonist is not a character, but an avatar, a vessel, a glitching interface, a being composed of skins, screens, and myth.
I am persona. In the loneliness of collectivity, I am persona. À l'origine du recommencement, le début n'existait pas. La mélasse cette matière noire, a vu naître la multitude de nos horizons. Je suis plusieurs en ces temps diffractés. Je dirais même que mon corps a été désossé pour transporter en ma chair dégoulinante quelques révoltes en soubassement. Cryptocorps aux souvenirs entrelacés. Clic de Cory sur la page internet de ses ancêtres. In the loneliness of collectivity, I am persona. In the loneliness of collectivity, I am persona. In the loneliness of collectivity, I am persona. In the loneliness of collectivity.
In this excerpt, the avatar is a mirror of multiplicity, of diaspora, of the impossibility of fixed identity. It is also a speculative proposal. What if we could embody our histories differently outside the frameworks imposed by colonization, across timelines, across species, across cosmologies? Spiraling the archive with this location. So I look for my astrogenealogy in the cracks of history, beneath the dunes, beneath the sea, beneath the pixel, where other words still whisper. So in this location, the episode 2 in the ongoing quest of the avatar persona previously introduced in Mélas de Saturne. In this chapter, they embark on a search for stories and archive related to the Cameroonian War of Independence. This film emerged from a long process of research, including interviews with members of my family and my own family to trace history shaped by silence.
Ilak le lini mingindan ilak. Mukumbuk song batera babi chiba isang masol. Emblana nili lak le lini. Igui habini basi habe bezni bayi churut tenkumb song. Ntimba asompale wamunye dibamunkanda bana baton babisising bapenjo kusugu bis de helwa be vilipan.
C'est ici, l'antre de la mémoire disloquée. Je me dissous dans le secret d'une histoire héritière, du mutisme réticent à se raconter. Ça s'agite dans le ressac, incessant d'ondes courtes, d'histoires étourdies, évaporées. Mais pourtant, rien n'a disparu. Les mots se sont réincarnés en pierres métamorphiques, compressés par les couches successives d'histoires à débusquer. Car il était cette fois fragile, cette fois cassé, à jamais perdu, mais transformé par le silence.
I wanted to add about this movie that it had been quite difficult to write and to research about that because all the colonial archive about this specific moment of War of Independence of Cameroon are totally hidden. So I needed to create like kind of specific interview with my relatives and try to recollect fragments of history, of this total silent history. And I think it was also something a bit traumatic for the people I spoke with my family and all the members, because I asked them sometimes to remember some part of the past that they didn't want to remember. And just for you to know, so in the rest of the movie, here the water becomes a kind of vehicle of memories. So when you continue the movie, like the film unfolds and the avatar is gradually surrounded by floating bubbles, and those floating bubbles are carrying those bubbles of memories. Water capsules of remembrance, which eventually form a fluid membrane of memory, a kind Aquarius archive in which we are invited to immerse ourselves. So for me, the shell is an archive also, as I told you yesterday, because of sedimentation and how the kind of the kind of plankton death and go straight behind the bottom of the ocean, creating this kind of layer of sedimentation, what we call the limestone, and also creating cliffs and mountains that you can see. So world building in this context becomes speculative archaeology, searching for origin, but not sometimes, but also for resonances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I really want to thank you for, again, bringing these elements. I'm always in awe of your work. And maybe for now we can move to the couch with Troy as well. I'm eager to have a conversation. And I don't know if are we gonna fit? Can we all fit on the couch? Or I can, okay. Space for all of us. And I have to confess something first. Somewhere between the problematization that you kind of mentioned, Troy, and this kind of narrative where we're domesticating nature and it's domesticating us, and between the work that you weave together with the poetry and the ancient Egyptian symbols and the futurism, I got chills. Partly because I'm quite impartial. I think the anchor point for me was like, oh, Egypt is in both conversations. I'm Egyptian, and I see there's a lot of kind of social decay happening in Egypt, and how did we get here, and how can we move beyond it? And I want you maybe both to take me backstage, and I'll start with you, Josèfa. And when you're constructing these worlds that you're constructing in your work, with the poetry, the symbols, the positioning, how do you go about doing it? What is the thought process? How do you start?
I think
Oh. Is it on? Can we maybe get a different mic? Oh, something clicked. Not yet. Oh yeah, someone else. Can we maybe get a mic? There we go.
So I think the process is always based on the poetry and the process of writing. Usually this is how I work, and then I start the research about the starting point. For example, it was the War of Independence. But also I have all this missing archives, so I needed to ask people about this specific moment and this specific history. So I did some video conference interview with my family and relatives, but also when you start seeking about the history of colonization, there are so many things that you have to think about. For example, the place of the maquis. So it's a a specific place in Cameroon, but also in France. So it's a place of resistance. And in Cameroon specifically, it was a place hidden in the forest. So this is where people who struggled against colonization, colonial power, were hidden in this specific moment. So they need to try how to survive inside this forest. So they survive through plants, through water, and they also create so many different recipes to survive with this really wildness of the forest. And I think that just to finish on this question, for sure, like the process, the writing process, I think is the main process in my work. And then I start to storyboarding, also to do the photomontage. But I think the photomontage, the process of photomontage for me is really a methodology of work, because it's a kind of mind map of my work where you can find all the different archives I'm working with.
All right, so there's kind of this notion of like, I want to really unearth the archive and present it, but then the positioning and the writing is, but I see also a lot of other elements, like the soundscapes, for example, and the visual worlds that you build. And I think you mentioned yesterday about this like non-linear loop in your video. Yes. And how do they come together, or is it more experimentation that you like?
It's a bit complex because it depends of the movie, but for sure the sound landscape is really important. So I always work with different sound artists, and for this movie it has been scored by Hassan. Yesterday Swallow Species has been scored by Fatima Al-Kadiri. So it's a collaboration. Also, this is what I said, my work and specifically movie is a collaboration, because you can't do and produce that by yourself. So you need to talk about and to talk with everybody who's involved in the process. Sometimes it's totally messy. Like last year, we produced a movie with, and one of my friends scored the movie, but we didn't storyboard anything. But I asked him to start to create the sound, but it was like super messy. But at the end, it worked. So and also for Désiré, I recorded for him some clarinet that you can hear in the beginning of the sound. I recorded my voice also with him, because it was in the really specific experimental sound music residency in Paris with le GRM. And also because he already had this material coming from me, he started directly to score the movie without any storyboards and everything. Okay. At the end, he sent me the sound, and he readjusted everything. And I was like, okay, it works. So it really
it's something about the work feels to me like this is an expression of a somewhat communal or collective imagination, totally. Right? Because it's also, that's also why I felt like, okay, this has really moved something. It is. Yes. I'm so used to seeing imagery, especially like the ancient Egyptian one, in a way that is confined, that is constricted, that is almost cabled. Yes. And somehow it felt, it's being liberated a little bit.
But maybe I think I forgot to say something, because I think everyone always has the text of the movie at first. So they start with that. So they have the voice of the character, they have the landscape and the environment.
Yeah. No visual aid.
It depends, really it depends. Sometimes it's like a really 3D raw stuff that we send, like we call that block anime, like a really weird character, like really raw video game from the 80s. But it depends,
Okay, I mean, I feel like there's a beautiful thread between also Troy's work and what you presented. It almost felt like a response, because Troy, you there's this urgency in your work, and I also want you to take me backstage to your work of the urgency of kind of embedding yourself within this Taoist eco-socialist, because you said I need to convince the Marxists of this. So how did you also get into that, and what was the positionality that led you there?
Well, I'll say that I was surprised that there was so much Egyptian themes in your work, and also we didn't coordinate to wear turquoise and this couch. This is all, from my point of view, a happy coincidence. Oh my God.
Oh wow.
And I guess I wonder in a way, it's like, what does one do with that legacy of like ancient Egypt, right? Where it's like this incredible civilization, but also one where most people did not have a good life, you know? And I think, and I'm trying to like wrestle with that, where I'm interested in actually a very important archaeologist who came up with the term like the Neolithic Revolution, which is like still dominates how we understand the transition to civilization, was devised by a Marxist archaeologist. And he came up with it, a guy named Gordon Childe, in the 1930s. And it was like, in the 30s, there's the Great Depression, there's things have stopped or are decaying. He's like, I want to rescue this idea of progress. And if we can look back the last 7,000 years, then we can see we have progressed. And it's like, because for me, it's like, why do Marxists need this progress, right?
Yeah.
Why is that so important to them? And to me, I think also if you care about environmental issues, it's just obvious, lots of bad things have happened as well over the last several thousand years. How do we wrestle with that? And I suppose I'm not really, I've given up in some ways of trying to convince anyone of anything, but I find these Marxists and their resistance to caring about animals, like the animal question is just something they would not talk about. Strange. It's also strange if you look at the history of socialism, like utopian socialism, animal liberation was an important part of that 200 years ago, and then it disappears. And it's like, why are they holding on to this progress, and like why can't they think certain thoughts? And I'm inspired in some ways by Bertolt Brecht, and because he is one of the few Marxists, pretty much the only Marxist who says we should have some useless things. Like it's nice to go into the woods and just have a nice time. And it's, even though it's useless. And he was interested in Taoism, right? Like he had to go outside of Marxism to have that thought. And I'm kind of interested in that problem.
Weaving together, because I think there's also this sometimes singular focus of like, let's talk about everything in terms of like money, capital, alienation of labor. But I think what you've done also in the beginning is saying, okay, no, there's a history to that weaves into how we think about capital, right? The domestication process and agriculture and so on. But I think the next question for me is I always face this question because I love speculative design, speculative fiction. I love alternative histories. But then few years ago, 2 years ago, something that happened, also very linked to the theme, really threw me off guard because there was an exhibition in Leiden about portrayals of pop culture, like that portrayed Kemet and there was an outcry in Egypt. And it felt like someone's bastardizing the history. And there was a weird anxiety that I think sometimes is a little racist. But there is a weird anxiety that something is being taken from us, and that you're really want to deface almost the history that we're preserving somehow. And of course, there's not a lot of critical introspection happening there. But it taught me that, okay, a lot of the speculative design, if it's not well placed, and if we're not tracing back the critical origins of how it came to be or why it's important, it can become a colonial practice. And there's also all these impending realities. Like there's a lot of displaced populations because of these histories. But what we're doing now, in the gap that I see maybe in the session now, is that we've reformulated the past. We have looked into, okay, how do we imagine a better future? But there's like a middle ground of like the immediate realities, the social. How do you kind of deal with that? Like with these receptions of the work that can be like, why are you doing this when people are dying right now? There is genocide happening.
You want to go first?
It's a difficult question, but important.
It's a difficult question, yes and no, also because for sure we have to think about the present, and also we claim that we support any type of injustice. So it's also part of the creative process. It's also a struggle just to claim your voice in institution, to claim your story and different alternate histories. But I think you can't, when you do this type of work, for sure you can't just forget about the present, but also the past, but also all the kind of link that you can weave in between those different temporalities. But for myself, also I'm a teacher in a School of Fine Arts, and this is a really big part and a really important part of my practice, and I see that as a part of my practice. And I ask my students to be involved in the political and ethical process. I ask them to create a context of production, and also not to forget about the present and not to forget about anything. So they need to map all the references they are working with. And this is a big and really important process. And also you have the process, comment on dit, militant en français, so like the political militant, like the militant process.
Okay,
it's a thing, to me, I do the distinction in between my art practice and my militant process. To me, it's the two different things. You can't do the same thing in those both places. And another thing for institutional and institutional level, I always ask for specific mediation about the project to create like a workshop with the young people, with children and teenagers, and also to have a specific access to the exhibition. So this is also something that we have to look up when you are an artist. I think educational process, mediation about around the work and everything. Also, we have to forget about the big ego of the artist. This is something that we need to be involved in, because the artistic process, as I say, is a collective process. It's not just one person. And institution, like I think, that try to create a kind of a solo ego of one artist, but this is a lie also.
Yeah, of course, it's an ecosystem that has produced that work.
Yes.
Troy.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of praising uselessness a second ago. Like, go bird watching, it's useless, it's great, you know. But I feel like the bad kind of uselessness, where obviously there's a genocide happening, and I feel pretty powerless. And it's also just insane, where we have so many problems, right? We have to do so much, and then there's this incredibly destructive, terrifying, awful, evil thing happening.
Yeah.
It's like we were busy enough before, and then there's like this terrifying thing, and it's hard to say what one should do, obviously. And I support everyone's work to stop the horror.
Yeah.
But I think it also is a sign of what will the future be like, and you can see liberals are quite willing to accept a lot of violence and alliances with fascists, and it's going to be terrifying. And if we ever want to have a real shift to an egalitarian, sustainable, good society, the other side is going to fight ruthlessly, right?
Yeah.
And it's really terrifying. We shouldn't delude ourselves otherwise. And I suppose the only thing that I guess my way into this is, like, as a historian, I study neoliberals and neoliberal intellectual history, and I suppose they're bad, but what's inspiring is like a small group of intellectuals can have like an outsized influence. And I think the left and environmentalists, they need to really think, like, what is the society they want, rather than just a couple hodgepodge policies, but have it fit together into this utopian goal. Yeah.
No, I think it's a really big part for me as well, is to like name your demons. Because, we say neoliberalism, but what does it mean? What is the network behind it? And I think in tech now, people talk about the terrestrial bundle of like the transhumanism, all the other kind of ruling ideologies that shape their active imagination making, that like force or impose or inform policy, that actually causes the harm. And there's a question of who gets to imagine. And we cannot imagine without naming these demons. So I think that's maybe one way in. I think it's time, I cannot see much, but if there is questions from the audience, or provocations, or comments, reflections, there's something in the back, maybe wait for the mic.
Hi, I have a question for Troy. Something you said I found interesting was that in the process of becoming animal, there is a sense of dehumanizing, which I thought was a reverse. It took me by surprise, because there's an assumption there that it protects this assumption that there is still a separation between human and animal, and then to bridge the gap with an animal, one must surpass one's humanism almost. It's sort of the outward turn versus the inward turn. So I'm interested in what you think about sort of like the inward turn as a means of becoming animal through one's own senses again, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure if I quite understand, but the way I guess I understand it is a bit like Simone Weil's work on like decreation, as in you have to like make space within yourself to be filled by something else. And I think with someone like Baker, when he's going around looking at his falcons, and I think just the process of bird watching, like you have to just kind of forget you exist. And by forgetting yourself, then you feel so much else, like, as in you're just feeling the rest of the world and the species and the air. And like when you go birding, you know, these old ladies, they can just say, like, oh, the wind is coming from that direction, the birds will probably come from there, and all this. And they just have this intense relationship to the world. Like a very good birder actually doesn't even use binoculars. They just sit in like a park and they just close their eyes and they can listen and tell, you know, not only the species, but the individual birds. And like, oh, that, you know, that male was born this year. And they can, and that the whole gap between the world and yourself just totally collapses, right? But I think to do that, you have to practice that, you know, dehumanizing or unhumanizing yourself, right? And it's something you have to cultivate. But I'm not sure if I totally am answering it, but we're happy to chat later.
Any other questions? I think until people maybe think of or formulate their questions, I have perhaps a provocation.
There's no angry Egyptologists in the room.
Oh
saying
no,
I'm just
I mean, one tweet, they'll be here. Yeah. No, one question is I think it's quite inspiring the both angles that you've approached your work from. But if there was one invitation, because we have a lot of like artists, creatives in the room, thinkers, where it's like, here's a simple thing that you can do, and maybe you don't have to simplify, but like go bird watching as an invocation, that people can leave this session and kind of try to invoke as a tactical practice of world building. You can take a second.
There are so many. On the political aspect, you can join the BDS. And on the creative aspect, you can start to write poetry.
Yes.
I think both of them could be something great.
I second that very much.
Yeah, I mean, the first picture I had for my presentation is from this artist in Toronto, and a guy named Cole Swanson, and he's also fascinated by, again, like, what is a dump, right? Like, it's not it's not this pristine, beautiful park, but it's my favorite spot in Toronto. And when he made this suit, and the suit, as you saw in that picture, if you remember, is made of these kind of blue kind of ribbons and all that. And the cormorants love the color blue. So when they make their nest, they take the blue whatever, and it's often like from IKEA bags, right? And then what he did is he went, so when the birds go away, when they migrate south, that he went into the nest and he grabbed all the blue bits, probably pissing off the birds. And then he made this suit, and he's just like, he wants to think like a cormorant, you know? And I think it was kind of a beautiful piece.
It's really very literally becoming animal.
You just like try to. Case. So how do you bridge that gap? You know, and it's like, do you go birding? Do you write poetry? Do you make that kind of art? I think like, the most important thing, like, it's an obvious thing, but like, you know, attention. Love is attention, right? Paying attention, and I think again, like when you like really pay attention to like another creature, you learn all these weird things, and to try to cultivate that attention.
I think to me, kind of reconciling both your invocations, it always feels to me, I always come to a place of like, oh, I have to be playful, radical. I have to be playfully radical and radically playful. Like, it's all of these things, and there's no other way almost to me at the moment. It's not even like a nice thing to have, as in to connect to these animals, but also to not disconnect myself from like the socio-historical context. You have to do both. And I think on that note, I would like to thank you both for such an engaging, beautiful conversation, for the audience for staying with us, and maybe a big round of applause for our beautiful panel here. Thank you.